All right, let's get into it. To really understand any conflict, you have to go back to the beginning. So today, we're going to trace the deep historical roots of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We'll focus on those key moments, the ones that really set the stage for everything we see today.
So, we're going to walk through 6 key stages of this history. We'll start way back in ancient times and bring it all the way up to the pivotal events that really shaped the 20th century. Okay, let's dive in.
First up, let's talk about the land itself. This is a place with such a deep, layered history right at the crossroads of ancient civilizations. So, long before we had modern nations, you have to picture this place as this vital corridor connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe. It was a major route for everything: trade, religious pilgrimages, and, of course, armies. It's been called by so many names over the millennia: Canaan, Judea, the Holy Land, and it was home to a whole range of peoples. The Canaanites, the Philistines, and the ancient Israelites, who even established their own kingdoms right here.
And the land saw just a constant succession of empires. It was like a revolving door. After the ancient Israelite kingdoms were conquered, you had the Babylonians, then the Persians, the Greeks, and then of course the Romans. And here's a really key moment. In 135 CE, it was the Romans who officially renamed the province Palestina. This whole pattern of foreign rule just went on for centuries, all the way up to the 400-year reign of the Ottoman Empire, which takes us right up to the end of World War I.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit to the late 19th century. The Ottoman Empire is starting to weaken, and in that power vacuum, something really crucial happens. 2 distinct national movements start to take shape. And the key thing? It's on the same land at the very same time.
So you've got these 2 parallel dreams emerging. On one side, you have Zionism. Now, this was more than just nationalism. It was a political movement really born out of centuries of anti-Semitism and violent pogroms in Europe. The goal? To establish a public, legally guaranteed homeland for the Jewish people back in their ancestral land. But at the exact same time, a distinct Arab and Palestinian nationalism was also on the rise, and this was rooted in a deep desire for self-determination, for independence from that crumbling Ottoman Empire.
So just as these 2 movements are gaining steam, a massive global event comes along and changes absolutely everything: World War I. Britain was looking for any strategic advantage you could get against the Ottomans, and in the process, they started making a series of promises that would completely redefine the future of the region.
And folks, this is where things get incredibly complicated, seriously. In its effort to win the war, Britain made 3 promises that were just completely at odds with each other. First, they promised Arab leaders independence. Then, they secretly made a deal with France to carve up the region for themselves. And then, they issued the Balfour Declaration, promising Zionist leaders their support for a Jewish national home in Palestine. They basically laid the groundwork for a future conflict right there.
Okay, so that tangled web of promises leads us directly into the post-war era. We're now in the period of the British Mandate, and we're going to see how the international community tried and struggled to deal with the escalating tensions that Britain's promises had lit the fuse on.
The British Mandate period was, well, it was a really tense balancing act. You had a surge in Jewish immigration to Palestine, driven both by Zionist aspirations and, frankly, the horrifying rise of persecution in Europe. And as you can imagine, this rapid growth sparked real fears of displacement among the Palestinian Arab majority. It wasn't long before those tensions just boiled over into violence, all through the 1920s and 30s.
So Britain finds itself completely unable to manage this escalating conflict. They're exhausted from the war, and they basically decide they're done. So in 1947, they just hand the entire Palestine problem over to the brand new United Nations. The UN comes up with a solution: a partition plan. The idea was to create 2 separate states, one for Arabs and one for Jews. But, and this is a huge but, to really get why the reaction was so intense, you have to look at the demographics. At that moment in time, the population was roughly 2/3 Arab and only 1/3 Jewish.
And so, as you might expect, the reaction was completely divided. Jewish leaders accepted the plan. For them, this was a historic chance to finally establish their own state. But Arab leaders flat out rejected it. Their argument was that it gave a disproportionate amount of land to the Jewish minority and was just fundamentally unfair to the majority of people actually living there.
So, that rejection of the plan, combined with the fact that British rule was ending, created the perfect storm. It set the stage for what would become the single most defining year of the conflict, 1948.
And things happened incredibly fast. It was sudden and it was violent. The moment the last British forces pulled out, Israel declared its independence,
and almost immediately after that declaration, the armies of 5 neighboring Arab states invaded. And just like that, the 1948 Arab-Israeli War began.
The human cost of this war, it was just staggering. In the midst of all the fighting, more than 700,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes. Whether they fled the violence or were forced out, the result was the same. They became refugees in neighboring lands.
For Palestinians, there's a name for this mass displacement. It's called the Nakba. It's an Arabic word that literally means the catastrophe. And to this day, it remains an absolutely central, defining event in their collective memory and their national identity. So when the fighting finally stopped, with an armistice in 1949, the map had been completely redrawn, not by a plan but by force. Israel now controlled more territory than the original UN plan had even proposed. Gaza fell under Egyptian control, the West Bank was now under Jordanian control, and this is so important. No independent Palestinian state was ever created.
And all of that brings us to the lasting legacy of 1948. This is the very foundation upon which the modern conflict is built.
You see, the events of that single year created what you could call a foundational trauma for both communities. For Israelis, it was a desperate, existential war for survival and independence. For Palestinians, it was the catastrophe of losing their homeland and being turned into refugees overnight.
So at the end of the day, this history didn't just redraw a map. It created two powerful, completely competing national stories, both born from the exact same events on the very same small piece of land. And it leaves us with this incredibly profound question, one that echoes from the past all the way into our present. When history creates two truths that are so powerful and so opposed, how do you ever build a common future?